what I wanted to do initially was just understand what an efficient golf coach actually is, and just understand from your perspective some of the points that bring that together. So, Martin, you've not heard of this before. What would you say would be the elements of becoming an efficient golf coach, or an efficient coach? Could be any kind of coach, to be fair.
Yeah, that's a really good question, I think. And I think the idea of being an efficient coach is also useful, because coaching, as we know, is trying to get that balance between information you're giving, engagement with a young person, and I guess learning and skill development. So you can give all of those individually, but if you don't do it in an efficient way, it's not going to work. So I can see all of the facets here of good coaching, but done in a way that the learner will learn efficiently as much as you can teach it efficiently.
Yeah. James, when you're talking to teachers and educators around the world, how often do you talk about the speed at which a student picks up a task or a skill?
Yeah, it's interesting listening to Martin there talking about efficiency, because sometimes, in fact, quite often, efficiency is the enemy of sustainability. And there's an awful lot of research that suggests the more a student struggles to learn something, the longer they retain that. Now, of course, I'm particularly talking about something more academic, in inverted commas, there, and I'm trying to put my mind into the coaching sphere here, because there's an awful lot of frustration that would come from struggle when learning a technique, for example, a stroke in golf, I would imagine. But if I talk about education and learning in the general sense, then actually one of the, what shall we say, drums that I beat when working with students is that if we hasten towards the answer too quickly in lessons, then the old adage of easy come, easy go kicks into play there. Yeah. And if we are, if we suffer the tyranny of the curriculum, where there's this enormous body volume of information that we have to stuff into the kids' heads, and we get it into them efficiently, well, you know what? It's pretty efficient for it to drop out at the other end. So I'm fascinated by this title, and I'm joining this session to learn far more than I expect to give.
Well, we will be certainly, we'll be extracting as much as we can from you as well. So don't think this is just going to go one way.
Okay.
The caveat I'd like to add to that, because I really appreciate what you've just said about it being sustainable. I think certainly from a golf coaching perspective, I like to create an experiential environment where kids have to demonstrate that they're going through a challenge in order to pick up a new skill. That's why I fell in love with the pit, and which I call the pit of doom, by the way, because it's, you know, when you're just about to go and learn something new, you just know what you're about to expect and what's coming. Mm-hmm. And you know, I can go on talking about this for hours. And as a parent and a coach all into one, I wish I'd have had so much more knowledge and skills. Certainly with my son, who's an elite level athlete now. We had many issues growing up in terms of performance and, you know, learning new things and the struggles that we go through, which brings us nicely on to you, Gordon, and how this all fits in. I think I'm really interested to know your perspective, given the fact that you've coached and taught, because you coach sport and you teach in school, and you've done it for a very long time, and you also specialize in helping parents navigate through the quagmire of their child's journey in sport. So, I mean, what's your initial reaction to wanting to be efficient as a golf coach?
Yeah, I think we've sort of touched on it already. I think for me, creating a really good environment where the children are engaged and wanting to come back for more, I think is a really positive thing. And I think to achieve that, you certainly need to be efficient in the way that you put across your information. There's nothing worse than the coach that stands there and pulls out 20 minutes out of the textbook about all the techniques of everything when we're talking to a 7-year-old who can barely put one foot in front of the other. So I think for me, it's understanding the different stages of the journey that the children are at, and I guess creating, environments that also focus on both the holistic and athletic development of those children, and finding ways of tying it all together. And I think if we do that, I think children will come back for more. They see a bigger picture.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've written down 4 things that will form part of this efficient coach, and it's a really tough one, this, because in order for development to be successful and to protect the future of any sport, coaches have to basically be able to commit to it, right? You can't do this half-heartedly. So I think there's got to be an element in this efficiency rating of being financially stable. So, to put it in black and white, the coach has to be feeling like he or she is making money. Otherwise, it's just not going to be sustainable. And I think that's a difficult one that I've faced over the years through various pots of funding, traditionally through the Golf Foundation over in the UK, and they do great work. But if they're paying the coach £3 an hour to deliver a golf lesson, is that sustainable for the coach to make a living? I don't know, have you come across what I'm talking about, Martin?
Yeah, quite a lot, I think. I mean, there's an interesting dilemma often from parents, particularly, I guess, in football, where they think that they're paying for the words that come out of the coach's mouth. So the more the coach talks, the more worthwhile they are, and the more value for money they get. Whereas it needs to be the opposite. And there's a bit of a dilemma, certainly, with that. And I do think this idea of, unfortunately, and maybe it's a British thing, where what we tend to do is we get the least qualified coaches, and we put them with the youngest, most vulnerable kids. And dear old Pat Duffy, God rest his soul, was looking at this 10 years ago with the Sports Coach UK 4x4 matrix, where you could become an elite junior coach, and you had really good knowledge, experience, and therefore you were probably going to earn more money to some extent because of that. But unfortunately, we're still stuck in the old ways at the moment, and we need to look at ways of changing that, I think, and give junior coaches as much notice and information and support and everything we can do as possible.
Yeah,
because they are the foundation. And if we get it wrong at the junior level, we've got nobody coming through at the top.
Well, it is very ironic, I think, that we have our least experienced coaches in golf teaching the most important group. And you've got the best coach, perceivably teaching the 45-year-old hacker weekend warrior, as we call them, for $250 an hour. It's very interesting.
Sorry, Gavin, just to say a little bit more on that. I think it's really interesting when you work out that people are very good at adults are very good at getting on with certain age groups. And it's no different to somebody becoming a teacher and deciding whether they want to do primary school or secondary school or anything else. So maybe we need to help the coaches better understand who they're best to work with. One analogy that I had from a student whose father used to coach at a football academy, a professional football academy. I think he coached the under-11s and he was really successful. And he was so successful, they thought he's really good, let's give him the under-18s. And it just failed miserably. So we almost need to better understand ourselves and our coaches to put them with the right groups for that to work. So not everybody can teach juniors.
Yeah.
So let's find the guys who are really good at it and help and support them do that.
Yeah, absolutely. What, James, how do you think that works in the academic world when faced with a group of children? I mean, do you think that teachers are put in front of the wrong kids, in front of the wrong age groups, or are we able to coach the teachers through situations like that?
Well, as I was listening to you, there was a couple of parallels that I made into education, the broader sense of it, particularly in schools, where very, very often the so-called top teachers or the senior teachers, they generally work with the older kids and indeed the top sets, and it's the newly qualified teachers or the slightly shaky ones who get last chance selection, and they always end up with the bottom groups. And of course, it ought to be the other way around. And you know, there are countries in which it is the other way around, and they tend to do extremely well in international tests. So now Finland, often people talk about Finland as having one of the best education systems. That's very misleading to say that, and I don't think many people from Britain would recognise it as top quality education if you were to visit the classrooms, because it's top quality 1950s education. But nonetheless, one thing that they do very, very, very well is they put their most qualified with the kids struggling most to get the basics right. But there was something else I was thinking as you were talking there, and this goes back to your original question, Gavin, about efficiency. And I wanted to bounce it back to the three of you here with all of this experience and expertise, particularly in the golfing and coaching arena. Efficiency, if I think in education, it would be efficient to say to primary school kids, elementary school, okay, if you're multiplying by 10, just add a 0. That's efficient. It's misleading and it leads to misconceptions, but it's efficient because it gets them the right answer. And so in the coaching situation, so my younger two kids had their first bash at golf this summer, actually. And it was really interesting. My son worked out very quickly that if you get one of the driving range rubber tees and you take that off to any piece of grass and you put your ball on that, he's going to be able to whack it much better than if the damn ball is on the grass. That was efficient, and he wellied the thing, you know, and it was getting reasonably good distance. But of course, then the junior coach came along and said, no, don't do that, because you're not going to have a yarking great big tee like that. Put it on the grass, and what you got to do is this. And of course, then he couldn't hit the ball, and he couldn't make it go very far. And so that's what I talk about going into the learning pit. So you started with a almost, we might call it beginner's luck. You feel as if you're getting it, and then you start to learn a proper technique, and you get worse. Your performance dips. It's that performance dip that I'm sure, Martin, you talk about in your university all the time. The performance dip, I call it the learning pit. You know, it's one and the same thing. And so what's efficient? It was efficient putting it on the rubber tee, but it didn't lead to good golf stroke. It's efficient telling the kids add 0 when multiplying by 10, because it gets the answer quickly. But it's, in the long term, it's an absolute flaming nightmare. Yeah. So I'm wondering, what do you mean by efficiency here?
Well, let me. I wonder if you'll change your perspective slightly. If I said golf, I'm not going to generalize, because I think golf is probably the only sport you cannot perfect. So you can perfect your GCSE maths, because you can get 100%. But golf is an infinite learning experience. And the whole reason I wanted to address this idea of becoming an efficient golf coach is because the more a student feels like they're progressing or learning, the more likely they are to stay engaged in the sport.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And but we need to know also, and the kids need to know, that there is a performance dip. And very often you have to get worse before you get better.
Oh, yeah.
If you're going to learn a new stroke, if you're going to learn a new technique, you know what? The ball's not going to go as far and you're not going to hit it as far yet. But you go through that. I mean, you know, we could talk for hours, and if we were around in the pub, not that we're allowed anymore, but let's say we were, then I would push back on you on the GCSE. There is no such thing as perfect in maths either. You use the example of GCSE, but there's a pass rate. And if so long as you get more than 70%, you get your A, and you get more than 80%, you get your A star. Well, I could say so long as you get round in 72 strokes, you've beaten the course.
Well,
if you want to set a bar,
yeah.
But I'm sure you're not thinking that's perfect, and I'm not thinking maths is perfect. I'm not thinking there's no perfect poem, there's no perfect performance and drama, there's no perfect music performance, and so on and so forth. I think probably your point about progress is the most significant to me, because we need to help our students feel as if they're making progress. But I think they also need to know sometimes progress is undoing. Sometimes progress means feeling as if you're going backwards, but you have to take one step back to go 2 steps forward. And a lot of students get disengaged and discouraged by taking that step back, because they don't know that there's going to be 2 steps coming forward.
Yeah. Now,
Gavin,
I'll come to
jump in here.
I wanted to just say one thing, because you, Martin, you've coached, and obviously you've coached Gordon. I think we all understand that kids are about to jump off a cliff, effectively into the pit, once they pick up a new task. But it's and we've all witnessed it. But the key element, I think, to this is that network of support around the young athlete that's going to help them navigate through that. And I think that's probably more like what you mean, James. Sorry, Gordon, I cut you off. That was very bad of me. But
yeah, no, not at all. I've been scribbling away through that dialogue unbelievably, and I don't think I can link it together, because I've got about 30 things that I think could piece together coaching, parents, and everything. Going back to Martin's first point about the efficiency thing as well, is I think an understanding of what a good coaching session looks like is really important to everybody. So from my point of view, as Martin said, there's lots of parents who think a really good session is one that looks really ordered and structured. And as you say, the coach is telling them what they want to hear, and the success rate is really, really high. So everybody feels really good about the experience, and then they come back. Yet we know that that isn't necessarily a really good coaching environment, because we want the organized chaos, and we want the elements of failure, and we want the learning that's going on and the decision making being made by the athlete. And it does look messy. And sometimes, you know, I joked with you, and it summed it up, linking back, told you that story in the football academy where the children were shown something completely new. And you stand there as a parent watching, and you're thinking, "Oh, this isn't great tonight. This is going horribly wrong." You get hot under the collar, and I'm watching it thinking, "Well, yeah, whatever." And then you take a step back. But again, I'm lucky, because you've got 20 years of experience, and they haven't seen this before. The children probably haven't seen it before. So just calm down a bit here. You watch everybody else, and they're making a similar amount of mistakes. So actually, it's all right, because actually this is just challenging, and that's the makeup of the session. I walked down to the end of the Astro on that night, and I'd worked out what was going on. Really good. The children improved. And I said to a few of the parents, I said, "Well, that was a really good session, that, wasn't it?" And a few of them looked at me as though I'd landed from Mars and said, "Well, it was a load of rubbish." And when I questioned them about, well, why was it rubbish? It was like, "Well, did you see how many mistakes there were?" And I think the understanding for parents on what efficient coaching looks like as well as, I think from a coach perspective, I think it's really good as coaches if we say, do you know what, guys, for the next 10 minutes, there's going to be 100 mistakes and that's all right. And I think we've got to lay that out when we coach. And certainly in rugby, for example, something I'm heavily involved in, there's sometimes you want it to be really on the money, success rate at around 90, 100% to build a bit of confidence, depending on what you're actually doing. But then there's other bits where you're allowed to say, do you know what? It's fine as a player. We're all going to make lots of mistakes in this next bit because it's going to be really challenging. And I think if there's that element of trust and that amount of dialogue that's going on, I think the learner's got a chance of engaging with it. And the parents got a chance, but they've got to know about James's pit, and we've written extensively about that because parents hate watching sport when the children are in the pit because it's like, oh my goodness, this is all going horribly wrong.
Yeah, it's doom, isn't it? It's painful. And this is the point I was making earlier, going through my son's journey. I wish I'd have known and had some of these coping mechanisms before, because it wouldn't have necessarily changed the outcome, but it would have made it a lot easier to deal with at the time, because it's hard. Your heart leads when you're a parent, and it's really, really difficult. So rather than sometimes taking your child through what are going to be really heavy, muddy waters, you'll take them around the side because it's a lot easier. And, what we've got to do is it's got to be really messy for them. It's got to be frustrating, and it's got to be, I think you touched on it before, James, where there has to be a deep amount of challenge associated with it so they can retain the information. Because if it's too easy, it's in one ear and out the other. And so I fully appreciate.
But there has to be shortcuts, Gavin, doesn't there? I was just going to ask Martin's view on this. There has to be sometimes, with our judgment as coaches or with what we're doing, we have to give some shortcuts. And surely as part in Coach Ed, we need to give some shortcuts. So when do we give those shortcuts? Because quite honestly, with the salaries that lots of coaches are paid, certainly young and experienced ones now, we're not going to find many who are going to sit for hundreds of hours to dig through all the things that we're making sound relatively simple here. So at what stage do we give them some of the shortcuts so that they can be efficient, as a starting point? And also when we coach, yes, we want this idea of questioning and this idea of, self-discovery and problem solving at the things, which is great, and I absolutely advocate that when coaching. But there are also times when actually, do you know what, we can just miss that stage, because actually we can just shortcut that by actually giving you some form of answer. And surely that's a judgment of a coach and an educationalist at that stage.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, Gordon. I think it's a really important point. But also some of the language we're using as well, I think, is interesting, because this is almost sounding like this is one big computer game. We've got shortcuts, we've got everything else, but we've now also culturally got a problem with failure, because failure we perceive now as a brick wall and not a hurdle. So what we're trying to do and what's happening, I think, is people are, and probably now parents, because you think about the generations coming through playing computer games. God, when I started playing computer games, if you died, you went to the back and the start of the game. Now you go back to the start of the level. So this idea about getting things instantaneously and very, very quickly seems to almost be lost. And actually that hard work that James has been talking about in the pits, we almost want to try and circumvent that. So you've got the parents looking in the pit, putting down a ladder for the kids to get out of, rather than allowing the kids to find their way. So we're beginning to lose an awful lot of that. And I think it's quite interesting, even with students now, it's how can I do it quicker? How can I do it without having to do the hard work? Why are you telling me this stuff when you're not assessing me on it? And we're almost missing this whole idea of the wider journey and learning everything that comes into it.
Very interesting. Our Leadbetter Kids certification consists of 5 modules now. And 4 of those modules embrace the notion of journaling. And actually, there's very little in the way of submitted assignments at the end of each section. We've got a couple of videos we ask the coaches to do and stuff. But we validate what the coaches have learned through video conferencing. but I was on a call with a young lady earlier today, and we spent an hour talking, and she was getting a little stressed and worried that the first module was taking in excess of 15 hours to complete, and she thought it was taking too long, simply because she was journaling almost everything and rewriting it in her little Bible. And, you know, what coaches have to go through to pick up the skills they need to be able to deliver great golf coaching, I think is very underrated. And I think I want to throw this in now at this point of the discussion and say, actually, you know what? Should we be throwing out this notion of how to become an efficient golf coach and just replace it with how to become a better golf coach? You know, because we're talking about all the things that we need, all the tools that we need as golf coaches to be able to create a far better experience and outcome for the children that we're teaching.
Effective is a far better word for me.
Effective, yeah.
And that's contextualized to the age group, the ability, everything you can think of.
Yeah, I think the efficiency bit came around factoring in the business elements that a coach needs in order to sustain their entity. You know, they have to be successful financially. They've got to have a sustainable model. And that, when I talk about sustainable models and measuring that, it's like, well, how many kids have you got coming into the funnel? How many kids are exiting the program? Is there a constant flow? Are you doing that efficiently so that your business is still sustainable, making the money so that you can continue to deliver, et cetera, et cetera? So it was looking at it really as a wider picture that goes beyond just the core coach skills, so that we can create this kind of efficiency rating. The jury's still out, of course, but we, as I said earlier, we're all attacking this from different angles. Gordon, I'm just keen to explore. We've talked a lot about how we use the parents properly to allow the children to get the most out of the sport that we're playing. And success in sport for children looks so different from one child to the next. We almost need to identify what that is in the beginning anyway. But how do we help children along their journey, especially as they go into the learning pit, picking up new skills, acquiring the tools to play different shots effectively? How do we use the parents to make it more productive, or indeed easier for the children?
Well, you know, as a starting point is, and this sounds really ridiculous, is we need to provide a little bit of information in a language that they can understand, and not baffle them completely with every ounce of science. It needs to be really real and something that they can relate to. I know in the coach ed work we do, you know, coaches often complain about conflicting messages from parents. And then when you challenge coaches back to say, and what messages have you given the parents, they'll look at you and say, well, not very many. So I think the providing of information is a really important sort of starting point, and certainly individual bits of that child's journey for that particular stage. You know, we're doing some work with football academies. You know, what you're looking at as an under-9 parent new into the system is slightly different to an under-13 parent, for example, an under-16 parent where it's potentially a future and a livelihood. So I think we've got to be really clear in what the sort of success criteria is at each of those individual stages. And we almost need to paint this lovely picture for parents of what the journey may look like and how they can best support. Because as you said there earlier, when you were talking about if you'd had some of this knowledge as well, Gavin, it probably did have an impact, because I bet your car journeys home were awful. Just like some of mine were and still are. And I'm very open about this. I certainly need to go into therapy for it, because it's human emotion kicks in. You know, even though I know how the car journey should be handled based on some of the things we're talking about tonight, we can still get it wrong. because obviously human emotion kicks in and it can outweigh everything. But yeah, for me, it's information. How are you creatively going to put it across? How can you help support parents with them backing up your messages if they agree with you? How they're going to question their child? I mean, we do work and parents say, well, what should I ask? You know, and we talk about asking open questions that allow the children to reflect on the experience and trying to, you know, tie the whole thing together rather than the grunting yes or no answer, which we get from most teenagers whenever we ask them any questions. So actually, come on, let's get a bit back and share the stories together and get the coach on board with that. It's tough, but we can certainly do more. I mean, you know, I'd never shared anything as a coach with parents 20 years ago. It was like, no, you're okay, thanks. This is my world, and we'll keep it that way. And I still, unfortunately, feel that that's still going on in a number of spheres. I'm hoping not, but I'm Martin sort of nodding away. I'm hoping he'll sort of agree with me a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the more great work you continue to do, Gordon, the more parents will have the knowledge and the skills to be able to cope with it, I'm sure. Just moving on from that, because that's one piece of the jigsaw puzzle that we've kind of addressed. James, I wanted to ask you a very broad question. So please forgive me when I ask, how do children learn?
Well, it's a good question. And as I've been listening to the three of you talk, I wonder whether that needs to be the question rather than how should we teach or how should we coach. It's how do kids learn, and are they learning? It's been a painful journey, but in schools generally, and some schools are much slower than others, but schools generally are moving away from thinking about teaching, and they're starting to look much more at learning because of the overwhelming evidence that often, not always, but often teaching gets in the way of learning. You know, we see a kid struggle and we dive in there to teach them. And it's what both Martin and Gordon were saying about those somewhat overprotective parents, the helicopter parents, or as the Scandinavians call them, the curling parents, who are sweeping the ice in front of their little darlings, you know, and it's all the time just trying to make it easier for the kids. And that doesn't help learning. That actually reduces the amount of learning. It increases the amount of teaching, it increases the amount of coaching, but it reduces the amount of learning. You know, it's thinking about teaching a child to ride a bike. It would be more efficient to run alongside and hold the frame the whole time. It would be more efficient to put stabilizers on. That's more efficient. It would prevent the little darlings falling off their bikes. It would make sure that they didn't get frustrated because we'd ensure that they succeeded. And it's Gordon, you were talking about watching these lessons and it looks, you know, they can be somewhat chaotic. Well, if I think about bike riding, if kids fall off but they dust themselves down, they get back on, and then the coach says, okay, I think you dropped your head this time. So if you look up and look at the horizon, by maintaining your eyes on the horizon rather than looking down, your body's naturally going to balance more by looking at the horizon. So what we've seen is we've watched them, we've let them experiment, we've let them fall off, for goodness sake, so it feels somewhat chaotic, but then we encourage them back on the bike and away they go. A phrase that we often use in our training is ready, fire, aim. And that's not me getting tongue-tied, it's absolutely the key. Ready, fire, aim. Now, if I was ever to become Minister for Education, that was the first thing I would change, is initial teacher training. I would take the 1 year, or however long your coaching programs are, but I'm going to talk about teaching. I'd take the 1 year training you do after your degree and I'd cut it in half. You'd do that half of the training. You'd go into school and teach for a couple of years, and then you come back out and do the second half. Because boy, would you be better at aiming. You'd have such better questions. You'd be much more reflective. You'd be much more thoughtful. And that's the ready, fire, aim. Ready, get ready for it, fire, have a go, and then aim properly. So to tie in what you've been talking, Gordon, you were talking about questioning there, and the car journeys home and so on. But I would be thinking from what we know about learning, and I don't know about coaching, but I know about teaching, and I would be thinking ready, fire, aim probably would work well, where a coach would give enough information for the students, the children, to have a go, but not so much that they go, I don't know what to do, and not so much information that they've got too much to concentrate on. They're thinking about their head, they're thinking about their body, they're thinking about the angle, they're thinking about their back, they're thinking about whether they're bending too much, they're thinking about their knees, and there's just too much to think about. So we give them enough as the ready, then we let them have a go a few times, let them make their own adjustments, and then we help them aim afterwards. And once they've had a few goes, they're better able to adjust. And also you can go for the ready, fire, question, aim. So I'm going to give you enough to have a go. I want you to have a few goes, and then when you're ready to ask me a question, stop and I'll come to you. And then I want to know your question. And they'll be saying something like, well, should I keep my head down? Or why did that ball skew off to the left? Or why do I keep driving the ball into the ground rather than knocking it up? I want them to, and then aim. So ready, fire, question, aim. And it builds that in. And when you're talking with the parents, it's saying, look, I'm teaching your kids how to learn golf. Ultimately, that will be to improve their performance.
Yeah.
But for today, for this 1 hour session or this half-hour coaching session, I'm teaching them how to learn, not how to perform.
Yeah.
Teaching them how to be a golf learner, so that they become that lifelong learner of golf, so that they become more reflective, that they have become more resilient, that they become more able to question themselves and to refine their performance when I'm not there.
Yeah, this is why we want to create this experiential environment for children, and actually driving children to the point where they get into what I call the sweet spot of learning. So they've had a go at it. They probably haven't been particularly successful in relation to the task you might have set. They'll have gone through some frustration, but they'll be the ones starting to be a little more inquisitive and asking new questions about how they can be better. And that can be done either individually or it can be done in a group if they're working as a team. And I think that's a very efficient way of getting your message across, right? Because if you took a group of children and they were on the putting green and you told them how to putt before they'd even tried it, it just goes in one ear and out the other. But you've displayed what you know as a coach, so you've taught it. You're the teacher, but you're not really understanding the learning process that the children have to kind of go through. I think this very nicely goes through to what I wanted to ask you, Martin, which was about being child-centric in your coaching, and making sure that how we behave as coaches really speaks to the reasons why children are there in the first place.
No, thank you. And actually, just to pick up on James' point, which I think links in here, is one of the things we haven't really discussed is play, and actually deliberate play, where you can make those mistakes, you can learn, you can then go back and question. Because as coaches, we almost do that. This is our 1 hour thing, and then we'll see you next week, and you come back and do another hour, and don't bother about the bit in between. There's no homework in there, and I think that's one of the things that we can be a lot more child-centric and child-focused on, about maybe giving small tasks, maybe giving them things to go away and learn. Just let them go and play. Yeah. Because we're not going to be there on the golf course when they make a mistake and they want to put and looking around, what do I do next? They have to learn in situ and get over those. And certainly I think this idea about being child-focused and child-centric is absolutely key, thinking about what those individual needs are for that child, because they can be very different. and understanding that we're coaching a person, we're not coaching a body. And also thinking about maybe there are additional things we need to consider. So with golf in particular is going to be more of a one-to-one sport than rugby or football. So there is more of an opportunity to understand and learn and help support and ultimately make it fun. That three-letter word makes a huge difference between engagement, learning, and everything else. If you can make it fun and you can be task focused, then your quid's in as a coach.
Yeah. So I've got a few questions that some of our viewers.
Gavin, could I add in just sorry to respond very quickly to Martin's points there. A couple of things. One is something I use a lot with teachers is that Lego has now overtaken Disney as the #1 toy company. And Lego comes from two Danish words, Lego, directly translated play good, but we might say play well. And it's go play well. So and I think there's a lot of parents, I'm sure Gordon would back me up on this one, that it's like all the gear, no idea. They just shower the kids with all this gear. When actually just what they need to do is just go and chop daisies. Take a club and just keep chopping the daisies. Go and clear the garden of daisies with every single one, you know. And it's having a play with this. And you say that three-lettered word makes a lot of difference. There's another three-lettered word that from Carol Dweck that who talks about growth mindset and fixed mindset, and it's the power of yet. And it's a really powerful thing because very often as parents and as coaches and teachers, when a child says to us, I can't do it, we often say, yes, you can. I know you can. Because what we mean actually is, I know you're going to be able to sometime in the future. But they hear us and they take it literally, and they think, no, I can't. Have you even seen me? I can't do it. And you're telling me I can. And so then they start to think, well, Martin doesn't have a clue what he's talking about here because he thinks I can, when obviously I can't. And they'll actually, some kids will actually try their damnedest to prove that they can't do it. It's a surreal thing. So instead of saying, yes, you can, the research around growth mindset shows that it's actually better to say, I know you can't, not yet. And it's that honesty. Now, of course, tone of voice in relationships important. You don't say, I know you can't. You know, you've got to get the tone right. I know you can't, not yet. And so you're showing that you're empathizing here. You get where they're coming from. You get that they're struggling, but you're also painting that really important piece that you can't do it yet. And then, so it's fun and yet, put the two together. I don't know what word that creates, but you know, you just go for it, really.
I think the play thing's a really sad one, isn't it? If we're all honest and sitting, we sound like sort of grumpy old men as we're sort of aging a bit. But this play one, you know, I find fascinating in coaching at the moment, that some of the things that I'm now having to include in coaching sessions were things that used to happen in the back garden. So things that would have been played on the streets and things that would have been done, I'm now having to create sessions within my sessions to do things that coaches, I don't think 20 years ago would have had to bother doing, because the children would have already been able to do those. And I think this idea of how society and the media perceive sport, particularly with what parents expect from it, has done nothing to help it, because we all know that a child's sporting journey is very different to the environments that we see on the TV. Yet parents actually turn up and want it to look like that as quickly as possible. So, you know, when can we play 11v11 football? And my child's going to get 2 touches in an hour, but oh my goodness, won't that be brilliant? And it's the same with cricket, you know, when we used to put them in the whites. And do you know what? We'll stand there for 4 hours and we won't play pairs cricket. But what we'll do is you can have 1 ball and then you can go and sit and watch for the next 3 hours, because, of course, you're going to want to play that game for the rest of your life. But that pressure's come about from an education point of view, but it's also come about because unless we can actually tell coaches and parents what this amazing journey is and what the picture should be, we're always going to be up against previous eras or the TV or the media and other bits. And I think the more we can get these discussions out there and allow people to reflect, the more chance we've got of making some inroads on them.
Fantastic. I think that's all. It's so eloquent when all three of you speak, really, and you all speak with such great passion. And I wanted to, before we answered a couple of viewers' questions, I just wanted to conclude with three kind of bullet points that I've taken from the conversation we've had. And actually, I thought that these three bullet points that we've all discussed would be the three that I'm going to talk about now, which is no surprise ultimately. But I mean, I think if we've got 3 points to take away from this, the first one would be, in no particular order, understand how children learn and create the environment where that is allowed to flourish. Make sure you bring the parents in on your coaching world, right? They've got to be a part of the journey because they are going to be that network of support for these kids when the kids aren't at the academy or with you coaching. And then the final bit, aside from, making it fun, we absolutely want to make sure that everything we do as coaches is for the benefit and for the reasons that the child is there in the first place. And those three mantras, I think, if you're coaching at your academy, wherever it is in the world, and you can answer positively to each of those three things, I think you are doing exceptionally well as a coach. And if you're not, then you might need to take steps to figure out why or how. Would that be fair?
Just on that, Gavin. Sorry, just on that, I think the important thing is where you're also saying with coaches around the world, the parents of from different cultures and everything else will have different expectations as well. So everybody's view of this are going to be not wildly different, but completely different. And to contextualize is the most important thing that we as coaches can do. We've got to be chameleons in that respect.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And I know, Gordon, you're touching up on your different language skills so that you can take working with parents in sport into the depths of Asia.
What, you mean they're not going to understand my sort of Northern English accent saying it as it is? They're not going to get that in Asia. You told me I'd get away with that, Gavin.
We don't get away with it south of Birmingham, mate, so I'm not even sure that they're going to really understand either. But no, appreciate that. So listen, I've got some questions from some coaches around the world, and feel free to pick up on it if you feel like you can answer the question. This is from Riccardo Celerino from Italy. When a young player is looking to start competing in tournament golf, how should a coach go about it? Is there a set guideline to follow? Is it more about deciding together with the parents and the kid as to what the plan will be going forward? Anybody?
Oh, I'll kick on that one. Surely it's got to be a team effort. Everybody's going to have buy-in with what's going on. So I would certainly go along with ensuring that the parents, the player knows what the expectation is, what the scenario is, how it works. So make it a journey for the whole family. And as Gordon says, the more buy-in you get from the parents, the more buy-in you get from the child, and the easier it's going to be as a journey for you as a coach.
Absolutely. Next question. Barney Witchart from here in Hampshire. How would you recommend a session is best set up to optimize a child's learning and enjoyment?
That would be very different depending on the child. Learning theory 101 is you start where the child is at, and you find out what works for them. I'm just working through some thoughts there, sort of more of a broader sense, and trying to connect some of the dots here that we used to, in consultancy in education, we used to go and do, I used to go and do a keynote, or we, in the former days, would go do a workshop or a seminar with, and that's what you get paid for. And we stopped doing that after a while because we realized it made almost no impact. Even though these keynotes and these sessions were well received, it made almost no impact. Why? Because the teachers would go back to school and they'd just get busy. And so all the things that they'd learned from us, they were forgotten over a period of a few months. So that one-off input just didn't work. Even 5 or 6 inputs didn't work. What was the biggest shift for us was to be very, very, very clear with a group of schools or a group of teachers. Here's how the balance is going to work. 25, 25, 50. Take that as percentage. In terms of the amount of time, the amount of effort, the amount of focus, 25% should be preparing for the workshop from us. So watch a video, try things out, do a bit of background reading, 25%. 25% is the workshop you do with us. And then 50% is go and use it, go and play with it, go and try it in your classroom, see how it works, action learning. So when I think about it in the golfing sense and picking up on your points about play and so on, I would think still 25, 25, 50. 25% of the time, prepare. So if you've got a 1 hour coaching session, you need to prepare at least an hour before that 1 hour. It doesn't have to be the same day, but fairly soon before it. Prepare yourself. Go over what you learned from the last time. Be practicing it, be thinking about what you want to work on, be thinking about what questions you have for the coach. Then 25% is coaching, and then 50% is play. So 25 prep, 25 coach, 50% play. And be very clear with parents, be very, very clear that you cannot rely on the 1 hour or the 40-minute or however long, you can't have that as the one and only time that the kids are practicing this sport and learning this sport, because otherwise they're not going to make very much progress. But if you think about it in that broader sense, 25% preparation, 25% coaching, 50% play, then you've got a chance of making some good progress there.
That's gold. Absolutely. I think you do very well for yourself if your first lesson with a group of beginners was to go and play a short hole. You know, put the sticks on the ground, put some different balls down, and just say, right, you know, the objective of the game is to get the ball in the hole in the fewest number of shots. Off you go. And then to pick up the pieces, start picking up the pieces as the coach. And that's when I love it when I see kids get into that sweet spot, effectively, of learning, and they start asking questions. They're the ones coming to you, wanting to know how to be better, how to beat them. So, you know, it's great. You see their personalities really start to shine through, rather than all stood there like lemons listening to you tell them the secrets of the golf swing.
As a coach, I think it's the experience you have to enable people to do that. Coaches are going to be stuck with a control thing because that's what they've been taught. They haven't got the experience yet to say, go on, just go and find out yourself, and I'll be there to help.
Yeah, which goes back to having the most experienced coaches teaching the beginners, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a real issue for me, and I feel really sorry now for younger coaches coming into coaching for 2 reasons. One, I think engaging with parents is really difficult for them because they're young and inexperienced and haven't seen a lot of the world. But also the flip side of that, their natural mindset is going to revert to the order that we talked about at the beginning. And the order's not necessarily what's going to make it a really effective and fun, you know, learning session. You know, I think all these things, like James said, I think, you know, and this is why, do you know what? I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I don't know how Martin feels about this, but I am so pleased that social media wasn't around 20 years ago when I started coaching. I honestly don't, do you know what? I started coaching and I did it through watching other people, and I talked to other coaches, and I did hundreds of hours a week coaching men's rugby and elite under 18 rugby, and I got better every week, reflecting, refining, picking up bits and pieces. lots of everything, bits of drills, bits of technique, bits of condition gains, management of players, all these different things. And you learn through the experience of doing it, as you say, which is really cool that James said, actually, you've got to do these things. And I feel really strongly in my workshops that parents can go away and implement something immediately the moment they walk out of the room. And it's the same when you go on a coaching thing. You hope there's something you can take away and put into practice. And I just feel so sorry with all the information that's out there, trying to sort of wade their way through it, and then people selling that there's one way to coach and be effective. Well, that's absolute codswallop. You need about 50 different strands to be effective as a coach, and you learn that as you go. And I just think, I hope that we've made some sense around the importance of obviously you've got bits of that style of coaching to do, but then actually there has got to be play, there has got to be fun, there has got to be game related, but it's all right to do a bit of everything. It doesn't all have to be fun, play and games. You are allowed to do a little bit on technique, and you are allowed to make children feel uncomfortable for a little bit, because that's what coaching is. But you need to create the environment around it for that to be holistically managed and effective, and look after the people that you're working with.
Holistic. I think that's the great word to kind of draw this to a close, because that is so much of what David Leadbetter's philosophy is all about, creating a holistic environment, from developing life skills more than the golfing skills, really, and how we try to package it certainly incorporates that holistic approach. So listen, guys, we've got about 2 minutes left. Do you want to close out with anything in relation to what we've talked about today?
Not in 2 minutes. I think we need longer than that, possibly. Certainly, I think what we need to help coaches, help individuals understand, is that the coaching journey, the learning journey, is almost a lifelong one. We change, we adapt. Things change, we develop. We have to come up with struggles. We have to overcome them. It is not a simple computer game. We can't do our notional 10,000 hours. You can't do it in 5,000. You can't just speed things up. This is a long-term process. We need to help people understand that learning, development, and getting better is not something you can do immediately.
Okay. Gordon?
Yeah, in a backdrop of society that's demanding instant gratification, Martin's absolutely right. And I think that's where we've got to rewind some elements of coaching and sport at the moment to understand that there is a bit of struggle in there, and it is a long journey. As I say, I mean, how many children have we put off music or sport? And even if we take parents into account, where they take the children twice to a football pitch and they struggle to kick the ball, and so he's not much of a footballer. Or the age of 10, they hear them sing once next to the person who's a little bit better next to them, who's already probably done a large amount of hours, and says, well, not much of a musician. and then we write them off, and that's the end of it. And actually, we haven't given them a chance to develop or get better at something. We just decided, oh, well, they're not that good at that.
I have a feeling that Gordon's talking about his own childhood here. It's just like, I'm sure you've got a marvelous singing voice, Gordon. Yeah. My thought is, listening to Gordon, he's obviously much older than I am, the way he's talking, but it does make me think that things have changed in a generation, and I dare say that all of us, when we were kids, we just played out, and you just larked about, and you kicked a ball, or you threw a ball, or did whatever you do, but you just hung out with your mates. I didn't know anybody who was taken off for coaching for different things, and now there's all of these coaching setups, for better and for worse. and there's a lot more chaperoning, and kids go from one organized event to another, to another, to another, to another. And there's lots of benefits to that, but there's a lot of downsides, as Gordon's very eloquently and slightly grumpily told us all there. So, and I think we can get at both. We can remind the parents of that and say, look, you're affording your children an opportunity that most kids, certainly of our generation when we were growing up, didn't have. But don't forget that the play that we used to have shouldn't be forgotten. We need to make sure there's opportunity for that, even if you have to organise for all the kids to come round and mark about in the garden or down the park. But make sure that play is part of it, because we all learned so much from it. And I think the bit about the social media, again, there's the flip side. It's a double-edged sword. There is a lot of problems with the social media, but also it is possible, very possible, for the kids to get online, to watch a coaching video, to watch a particular technique, and to try it out a few times before they get to the coaching session. And so it's trying to get the best of every world, rather than throw the baby out with the bathwaters. We seem to have done in life generally. We seem to have replaced free play with chaperoned, organized events, and we've lost the good stuff. But we can get a balance, and that's an opportunity that I think is too good to miss.